Say that if you Clark. I might just.
Okay, we're just waiting for some people to keep logging in on Zoom, so we'll get started in a minute or two. Okay, is everybody sitting comfortably? I hope you are. You're very quiet looking. Yes? Are we excited to be here today? It's really the first time we've been able to give out this information about domestic abuse in Scotland. We have a lot to get through, but before we get started, first of all, my name is Lucy Clark. I was the coordinator on this research project. There's a number of different people involved and stakeholders who will be getting up and giving presentations. Sorry, I've got to orient myself to look at the camera, I've been told, because I keep addressing the room. So just to let you know that not deaf police officers. What is wrong with me? There are lots of police officers here from the domestic abuse unit. I want to thank them very much for making the time today to come and meet the deaf community and find out what we're doing. I've got a responsibility to see where the fire exits are. There's one there, or go down the stairs. The toilets are out that door and you turn left. So that's housekeeping done. Also, before we start formally, this is a safe space. We are dealing with sensitive information and sensitive issues to do with domestic abuse. If you've been through that experience yourself, you're allowed to leave the room at any point. You're allowed to log off the Zoom. If you're feeling unsettled or feeling that you need to offload, please do not do so at this event. Afterwards, we can introduce you to the best people who will guide you through that process. Sarah, where are you? I think Sarah Winters is here, isn't she? There she is. So Sarah's here. So we've got people on hand able to help you after the event. Also, just to let you know that this Justice Signs 2 project is a large partnership and collaboration with other service providers, Police Scotland being the obvious one, deaf organisations, domestic abuse organisations, all working together to make sure that we're raising awareness about how deaf women can be kept safer in these situations. So I hope everybody is on board and happy with all that. Now, I do want you to feel comfortable and to know that a lot of the information we're giving out, we're going to be doing it in brief. Justice Signs 2 has been raising awareness about domestic abuse because deaf women have traditionally not been able to access the information. So we're going to be talking about our project. I'd like to introduce Jemina Napier. She's going to be coming up to take us through the first block of information. Okay, hopefully I'm standing in the right spot now. Thank you very much, Lucy, for starting things off this afternoon. It's lovely to see so many people here in the room. We've got a mixture of deaf community members, police officers, interpreters, and online, I think there's about 20, 25 or so people joining in, and they are also a diverse group. So Lucy and I have been working together closely in the center of this project now for about two and a half, almost 3 years, apparently. What's crucial really about the aims of this project and really what we're hoping to achieve today is to really emphasize partnership and working in partnership. We have worked very closely with Police Scotland in this, particularly with their equality unit. And we have Stephanie Rose, who will be up later. I think it's been a 7 or 8 year relationship with her and with Police Scotland. And it's through this partnership and collaboration that we've been able to achieve such a large impact and an improvement of access to information and services for deaf women in Scotland, all over the UK, but particularly in Scotland, to feel safe. There are other partners in the project, such as Sign Health. Yeah, so we've got somebody from Sign Health here. And Marie from Sign Health, she's here. She's responsible for Sign Health's domestic abuse advice and support service within that organization. So we're really grateful that they've been involved as a stakeholder in the consortium. So it's great to see her here today representing another one of the partners. Can we have the next slide up, please? So just as a little bit of background, specifically, we're talking to you today about two different projects. The first is called Justice Signs 2. Now, that is obviously a follow-on project from the Justice Signs, which looked at police services in general in terms of deaf people being arrested, reporting a crime, or witnessing a crime, how they were to deal with police services through the interview processes and those other procedures. We identified that they're really, in the middle of that project, that the domestic abuse situation was extremely difficult in terms of navigating and confusing for deaf women and a dearth of information. That's why we decided to set up Justice Signs, to be able to look and deal with the domestic abuse issues in more depth. So that's the wider project where we developed resources and worked in partnership with, as I've said, Police Scotland, Sign Health, the British Deaf Association, Deaf Action, where we are today, and also ASLI, the Association of Sign Language Interpreters in the UK. DeafLink, is also involved. They're from Dundee, and we have Alana here. So she's their executive director. She'll also be making some comments later on. So really, from the very first project and the development of resources, we did realize we needed extra funding, and we got Silent Harm as a project funded to develop training to police officers and interpreters all around Scotland, particularly in the rural and remote areas, and working in partnership with Irish organizations as well. So we've got Stephanie Rose, and another important person is Sarah Winters, and she's from the Domestic Abuse Coordination Unit in Police Scotland. I hope I got that right. So they've been working with us. Really, they're the key stakeholders from that side, and we couldn't have done this project without them. We've learned so much from this working partnership. So we've been delivering training all around Scotland. So you can see how what we've developed is applied in the real world. So really, that's where we're at. That's a bit of an information dump, but there are two projects working in harmony with one another. So whilst we talk about these projects, we are going to look at what else Police Scotland does to support deaf women, well, deaf men too, as well, because this isn't a purely gendered experience, but in order for the deaf population in Scotland to feel safe. So back to Lucy. Thank you. Right, the next slide. Okay, so now you've got an understanding from Joanna's brief introduction about the background for these two projects and how we've organically brought together these resources for distribution and dissemination. So there are 4 different parts to today, and I'll ask different people to come up and talk us through each of these respective parts so that everybody can have a very full rounded idea of what's been going on. But the first thing is, if we're thinking about the process, identifying domestic abuse is really the first step. Do people in the deaf community fully understand what constitutes domestic abuse, how to identify, what the definition of it is, if you like? Secondly, if it has been identified, whether you're the victim or you know somebody who is or may be, what do you then do next? That's part 2. When we get to part 3, we'll deal with when you've contacted the police, what services can you expect to receive? So that'll be the third part of this afternoon. And the fourth part, as it says on the slide, other things, other parts of the landscape, people, services, what's out there for support for deaf women. So those are the 4 parts that we're going to be going through this afternoon. I hope that's all clear for everybody. Can I have the next slide, please? So let's do part one, identifying domestic abuse, because there's a lot of gaps of information in terms of our education as deaf women and as a deaf population about what's right, what's not right. So the project collected a lot of information. We interviewed professionals, IDVAs or IDAAs. That'll be clarified. Well, I'll clarify that now. In Scotland, we have an IDAA, an independent domestic abuse advocate. In England, it's an independent domestic violence advisor. Similar roles, slightly different titles. So that's, if you see IDAA and IDVA, that's what we're talking about. But obviously in Scotland, north of the border, it's IDAAs. So to that end, I'd like to introduce Sarah Winters, who can talk us through identifying domestic abuse and the first part. Thank you.
Of course. Sorry, was that, sorry, I'll start again. When we started to do work on the project, one of the things that was really obvious was that actually people were struggling to understand what actual domestic abuse was, what it meant to have to be domestically abused. And through our work with the workshops, we were trying to educate deaf women, deaf people and the interpreters to what domestic abuse is. And in Scotland, we have quite a unique definition of domestic abuse, and that's what's up on the screen just now. So it's any form of physical, verbal, sexual, psychological or financial abuse which might amount to criminal conduct and which takes place within the context of a relationship. The relationship will be between partners. They could be married, cohabiting, civil partnership or otherwise, or ex-partners. And the abuse can be committed in the home or elsewhere, including online. Sorry, I'll slow down. So another thing that we wanted to kind of point out when we did the project was that in England and Wales, they have a very different definition of domestic abuse. Their definition includes familial abuse, so siblings, mothers, fathers. In Scotland, it is partners or ex-partners, so it's those intimate partner relationships. Okay. One of the other big things just to point out is that what we found was that a lot of people thought that domestic abuse was purely physical, but actually it encompasses all these other things as well. So it was making people aware of that and also, you know, giving some examples to what those things might be. So so for physical, people kind of understood that as maybe hitting, spitting, punching, kicking. But when we started to talk about verbal abuse, sexual, psychological and financial abuse, it became a wee bit trickier to define. So just for kind of some examples, so when we talk about like our verbal abuse, we're talking about name calling, making threats, belittling you, putting you down, and that can kind of verge into psychological abuse as well. So potentially the term gaslighting, if you've heard of gaslighting, when someone's making you believe that your sort of perception of reality is wrong. And then financial abuse could be anything from not allowing you access to the funds. You could be sort of monitored with your spend, you know, having to show receipts and things like that. You could be prevented from having employment, prevented from education to enable you to get employment. So all these things are within the definition. So that was one of the biggest things, was to actually put across what domestic abuse actually is and what it means in Scotland. So that's that for just now for the definition. Lucy, back to you. Yes, next slide, sorry. Apologies. Oh, yes, of course. Yep, domestic abuse. So this would be the sign.
Okay, we just wanted to add in the video just because we had asked deaf professionals working in the area, survivors, a whole bunch of different stakeholders came together for long discussions about not the right or the wrong signs for things, but more about appropriate terminology for the dissemination of this information. So this is an example of the glossary output from our project, which can be used by social workers, police officers, anybody working in this area, so that they can have a clear understanding of exactly what's being dealt with. So the Justice Science 2 website has this glossary on it. This is one of a number of terms and that we've covered, giving a definition, some basic signs that can be used. So it's useful information to get out there. So please do look at the website, Justice Science 2 in your own time. And with that, I'm going to hand over back to Jemana. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay. Just wanted to talk to you a little bit about research. I'm not going to go into it too much in depth. We're really focused on the impacts and the outputs of this research, but we have had some publications. If you are interested in doing further reading, we can direct you to these. Lucy and I have had a few vlogs uploaded onto the internet as well. So I'm just going to give you some of the key research findings. But what's important to outline is that we did a survey with many interpreters and police officers, including support services, asking those people working in this space, what do you do if you're confronted with a deaf woman, and we're focusing on deaf women mostly in this project, who has had the experience of domestic abuse? For the interpreters, we asked them if they were confident and comfortable interpreting in those settings. For the police officers, that they were confident that they knew what to do. And the responses were very interesting. The interpreters, by and large, are very reluctant to work and accept assignments in the domestic abuse space because of the sensitivity, the vulnerability of people in those situations. And many interpreters felt that they weren't informed or educated about the terminology, the processes, so much so that they had a sense of unease about working in these environments. And from the police side, from police officers' point of view, when they're confronted with a deaf person, how they then accommodate for that person in terms of the regular service they provide. Most officers thought that providing an interpreter was really a solution to that, but we needed for them to engage more with understanding how deaf women's needs need to be met in a more complex way. Some police officers didn't know how to book an interpreter, whereas others didn't know to ask for an accredited or qualified interpreter. Or they didn't understand as police officers how to look for the appropriate interpreter for this setting. And also, interestingly, from the police side, when we asked them, look, if you are preparing an interpreter for one of these situations where you're interviewing a deaf woman, do you prepare them so that they know what to expect? And we got affirmative answers to that. But then asking the interpreters, when you arrive at a police station for a domestic abuse interview, do the police prepare you? And they said, no, they don't. So we had a conflict in terms of the feedback that we're getting from both sides. So that really identified a training need, resources and support required for both sides of the equation in order that they work concordantly together to deliver the best services for deaf women in Scotland. A really important part of our research, when we interviewed 8 deaf women. Lucy did the interviews through her own personal network and reaching out to other survivors to get their narratives and their stories. We weren't asking about particulars to do with their situation, but more about when they reported, what then happened, what their experience was of dealing with services. Were they supported? Did they have access to information? Were interpreters provided? Were there barriers that they experienced? So we identified 7 main topics, common themes, if you like, in terms of barriers. The first being the obvious one, access to interpreting, whether that's getting an interpreter at all, continuity of interpreting services, because a lot of women expressed a preference for not only female interpreters, but the same interpreter through the whole process, and certainly not a man. The fact that there was a lack of deaf cultural awareness generally in the police service. They felt respected as a deaf person, but in terms of sensitivities, the police not understanding that the deaf community is a very small community, that has an impact on reporting abuse, naming somebody, using the same interpreter for both sides. There was an identified lack of deaf cultural awareness. Also, the need for ongoing support was identified once a report has been made, because the services are very mainstream hearing services. There's no money to provide for interpreters for ongoing support services for deaf women. So we identified a gap in the landscape. So we've got organizations like Sign Health. Their services are only available in England, not the other countries in the United Kingdom. In Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, deaf women have to go to hearing services and therefore experience barriers. In terms of training needs for the interpreters and the police, that was already talked about, but for the deaf community as well. We've got deaf links here, and Alana will talk about that later, but many deaf women simply don't know, first of all, what domestic abuse is, what the definition of it is. Sometimes they discover after the fact, once they've had this information, that they have experienced domestic abuse. So where is readily available information in BSL? Also, a recognition of diversity. Deaf women say, okay, I may well come from, I'm deaf, but I might come from a different cultural background. If it's perhaps an ethnic background, a religious background, there are other factors that influence what's going on, as well as my deafness. And when and where it's okay to talk about domestic abuse, and whether police services are able to recognize those additional intersections to do with gender, sexuality, religion, culture, all those things that can impact and affect how you access and receive support services. And in green here, it says here there's a real lack of understanding about consent and rights in the deaf community. Do deaf women really understand that they have the right to say no? And those crucial bits of information we identified as lacking in the deaf community. So from our interviews, what we wanted to do was share some of these stories from deaf women. We clearly couldn't show those women signing because they would have lost their anonymity. So Lucy created this documentary. There's a link down at the bottom of this slide if you want to watch it in its entirety. It's 20 minutes long, so we don't have time to show it today. It's fully in BSL. There aren't any voiceovers, but there are captions for those who don't sign. And it really is bringing together the stories of domestic abuse survival from deaf women. It's quite impactful. It's really, we feel it's very useful for police officers, interpreters, and deaf people to watch. All the PowerPoints will be available. All the links will be available. We'll put everything into the Zoom chat as well, so you can watch it in your own time. So that's really a summary of what we found in our research phase. And we identified that it was so important to have resources and training. So for all the three sides of this equation, the interpreters, the police officers, and the deaf women themselves. And it's back to my teammate, Lucy. Here we go. So before I move on, the Silent Harm documentary has made a big impact in terms of Police Scotland services, because when we show them that, you can see the look on their faces as they're taking all of this in. First of all, they're confused because there's no sound on the video, and it's really impactful. That really helps people empathize what it might be like to be in a room where people are talking and you are completely cut off from what's going on. So it's useful to watch. There are 4 or 5 different short stories within the documentary. And it is deliberately discomforting to watch, because everybody needs to understand how deaf women have unique supports. Okay, so let's move on to part 2 of this afternoon. And that is what to do next. So whether you're a victim yourself or you perceive that somebody else may be, what do you then do? Now it's my pleasure to introduce Kat. She's going to be able to come to the stage. She's so shy. Look at her. So would you like to introduce yourself and your involvement in this project? Am I standing in the right place? I'll take my glasses off. There we go. Hello, everybody. My name's Katrina Lafferty. I'm from Contact Scotland and 999 BSL. So those two services, I'll just quickly explain. These are online interpreting services. That means that deaf people can make calls via a VRS, a video relay service, or video remote service. So you make video calls. You don't need an interpreter. You don't need to arrive at the police station. You don't need to do all of that. You can do all from the safety of your home and your device. And this is really the first point of contact, 999 BSL, for any deaf people who are victims or suffering or involved in a crime in any way and want to report it. You can do that in BSL through 999 BSL. Contact Scotland also exists. They are two distinct services and apps. The 999 BSL app is obviously for emergencies, and Contact Scotland, in terms of that app, or through that service, you can access 5 different services. But one of them is Police 101. What that means is that you can report a crime, report being a victim of a crime, or if you're even unsure about what's going on, and you're unsure whether to use 999, you can contact them first. Look, confusion is still out there, but and the police are very well aware of this, and they know how to direct people in terms of what's an emergency, what's go through 999, and what needs to go through Contact Scotland. But these are that is not an emergency service through Contact Scotland. So that's the important thing. That's to be used for reporting of a crime, whether you're a victim, whether you're a witness, whether you think somebody else is. 999 BSL is only in an emergency situation. Something is happening right now and you need to report it and get some intervention from the police in order to be safe. So that's what those two apps are. And what that means is that a deaf person will be connected via a remote interpreter directly to service providers. In fact, any service provider through Contact Scotland. But a deaf person is then able and has the agency to do that themselves via a remote interpreter to the service provider, and that service is complete and online. So that counts for both Contact Scotland and 999 BSL. You're going through an independent interpreter who's remote directly to the service provider, and the interpreter will interpret in real time. For more information, you can look at our website, Contact Scotland and the 999 BSL. They both have websites with lots of information and resources. And also, I'm happy to provide training for any groups or people who need some more information. So please do contact us. There are also, for those in the room, there are resources on the table at the back. So please do help yourself. Come and talk to me afterwards. And I think it's important to say that this 999 BSL is a new and vital service. Deaf people are using this emergency service. So we are, if you're unsure about how to use police services, again, contact us. And we do encourage you as deaf individuals to use these services in order that you feel safe. And they're really available for you. So it's 101 and 999. Okay. I think that's it. And the information also will be in the chat on Zoom. And I think you can do that on Zoom, and you can come up and talk to me in person, of course, if you happen to be in the room. And like I say, the websites have plenty of information, both Contact Scotland and 999 BSL. Okay. Very, very useful information. It's really good to know that we have this direct 999 service, and we have this new level of independence and safety when it comes to reporting. So the next part of the slideshow, and I'm going to hand over to Stephanie Rose.
Hello there. I'm Stephanie Rose. I'm from Police Scotland's National Equality and Diversity Unit. I've just got one slide, you'll be happy to know. Just to follow on from what Kat was saying, we get a lot of confusion from all communities about when to use 999 and when to use 101. Okay, if you feel that you or any other person's safety is at risk, then that's your contact, your 999 BSL service. If you want to contact the police, but it's not urgent that you get the police as quickly as possible, then that's the Contact Scotland BSL service. But as Kat said, you'll never get into trouble for using the wrong service. If you need the police, just use one of them. We're absolutely desperate that you feel like you can utilise the services. If there's any police officers online or in the room, it's really important that we publish these services and promote these services locally and nationally as well. We've been trying to improve the information that we have in British Sign Language for BSL communities in Scotland. On our website, there's an area that you can find under the Contact Us section that's marked British Sign Language, and we post any videos on any topics of relevance. So you'll find some videos there. There's a very old video with me with very bad haircut talking about the Contact Scotland BSL service. There's also videos on bogus callers and hate crime, for example. And we're absolutely delighted that the Domestic Abuse Coordination Unit have committed to getting all the information on our website that's in domestic abuse translated into BSL, and hopefully you'll see those videos soon on the Police Scotland website as well. That is a massive impact out of this research project and this partnership that officers within the Domestic Abuse Coordination Unit understood when they were told about the barriers to reporting for deaf women experiencing gender-based violence, and they really took that on and really advocated on behalf of deaf women to make change with the police services. So please have a look on our website, but we need more information videos. There's not nearly enough on there. 2 or 3 videos doesn't make us look good, in my opinion. So it's really important that you feed back what other information you need or you want, or you invite us along to your local groups or your national groups where we can come and speak to you about what you think is missing and how we can best fill those gaps for you. So please contact us. We can set you up with local police engagement. We can set you up with national police engagement to try and get a better understanding of how you access services. So I'm in the room, but also I'll take any questions from Zoom online at the end, and we'll make sure we get any answers back to you. Thank you.
Hearing people are always confused, aren't they? Handing deaf people microphones. Oh, well. Okay. So now you understand 101 and 999 as available services, first point of contact, something incredibly valuable. If you do want more information, please do have a look at the Police Scotland website. Give us feedback. They always want to continually improve. So with that, can we move on to the next slide? Okay, so we're on to part 3 already. So you've contacted the police as a result of what's going on. What services can you expect to get? And we've collected and collated a lot of information. There is now a plethora of information available. And it's back to Sarah again to talk us through the next part and what you can expect on this pathway and process, if you like. So without further ado, Sarah.
Thank you. Can't get used to this microphone. Okay, so what service do you get? So I'll just keep it quite brief because some of the information can be a wee bit overwhelming. If you contact the police, you're going to get officers coming out. You can, depending if it's through the 999, and if it's an emergency, then they're coming to wherever you are. If you've contacted maybe through 101 and it's not an emergency, then you could maybe arrange to go to a police office or somewhere you feel comfortable, whether that's in your home or whether that's somewhere else, and the police will come out and speak to you there. So the likelihood is it will be police officers in uniform that will come out. And really what they want to do, first and foremost, is make sure that you're safe and that you're well. And not just yourself, but your children and anyone else that's in the home with you, potentially other witnesses. And sometimes that is the person that could be causing the harm as well. We have that responsibility to make sure that everybody is safe and that we're looking after everybody's well-being. When we come out, we will want to speak to you, communicate with you to find out what has happened. And through an interpreter, we'll want to get what's called like a statement. And that's really just your version of events, is what's happened to you. And that's something that, just to make you aware, if you're given a statement, then you do have the right to specify the gender of the police officer that's taking your statement for you. And the police will do their best to accommodate that. In any circumstances that they can't accommodate that, then, you know, we'll make sure that that's noted. When you're giving your statement as well, it's important to know that, I mean, a lot of the things that you could be talking about, you know, will be upsetting, will be traumatic, and it can be pretty exhausting to tell somebody that information, especially a stranger, or two strangers, a police officer and an interpreter. And so it's important to know that you can take breaks when you're giving your statement. It doesn't all have to be done in a winner. You can have breaks, and you can also have somebody with you who's not a witness in the situation, so hasn't witnessed the incident that you're reporting, but someone that you might want with you as a support as well. So part of our investigation would be getting our statement. It would also be things like, obviously, in case there's any medical attention needed, so organising an ambulance. If you have any injuries as a result of the incident, then we'll want to probably photograph them, or we'll arrange to have a medical photograph them. We'll also want to speak to any children that are in the house as well, who have been there at the time of the incident, and that's really just to kind of make sure that they're okay as well, if they've witnessed anything, and just to see if there's anything else that might be upsetting them, to just make sure that we have, you know, considered the safety and the well-being of the children as well. The other thing is that we probably will speak to like neighbours, depending on the incident. If it's been an incident in the house, for example, and you maybe have neighbours, you're in a flat that maybe above or below you, we might want to speak to neighbours to see if they're aware of anything, if they've seen anything, if they've heard anything, potentially things like CCTV, ring doorbells, if that's going to give us evidence to build a case. And you know, just important to note as well, when we're taking the statement, we probably we will want a lot of information about that relationship, the history of that relationship, any children involved, and it's just so that we can really build that sort of holistic picture of what's went on. One of the other things that we do is the domestic abuse questions. And so the domestic abuse questions, that is our risk assessment, and it's our way of finding out sort of fast and accurately how much potential danger that you're in, and that's so that we can get you the right help as soon as possible. Interestingly, when we started doing the workshops and we talked about the domestic abuse questions, both with our deaf women participants and the interpreters, what we found was that the domestic abuse questions didn't translate to BSL. They were overwhelming, they were confusing, and so what we did was we did some workshops with interpreters, with deaf women, police officers, and we have created a BSL version of the domestic abuse questions, which we're hoping to launch really, really soon. The questions have been recorded by Lucy. And has, yes, sorry. Yeah. So they have been recorded, and they'll hopefully be launched soon. So that means that when you are being asked the domestic abuse questions, you'll have an officer there asking the questions, but you'll have your interpreter translating them. And the BSL versions are really there to help both you and the interpreter to understand, firstly, the reason why we're asking these questions, and you know, what these questions are. And there's about 20, there's usually 27 domestic abuse questions, but believe 26 in the new DAC. It gives us a risk indicator, so it's high risk, medium or standard risk. Now, high risk would be like 14, a score of 14 plus. However, it's important just to note that the police officers that are doing your risk assessment, they can use their professional judgment and their experience and the other surrounding factors to make that risk higher if the score is lower than that. So I think that's all on the. Have we got the wee explanatory statement from Lucy? Okay. So as part of the questions, we also recorded a statement to explain what they are, so that can also be shown to people before they're asked the questions, just really explaining why we're asking the questions. I think that's everything. Oh, sorry, next slide. Yep, the video. Is that right? So this should be the wee explanatory statement.
What questions will be you'll be asked, and there'll also be a plan created. Okay. So now we understand what is the DAC, the domestic abuse questionnaire. It's really important as deaf women for us to understand that some of these questions are in their original form really complicated. And for victims, you know, it can be, as Sarah just said, quite overwhelming. You're going through an emotional, traumatic experience. You might be very tired. You might be very unsure about what's going on. But it's important. And that's why I'm really, you know, very excited that Police Scotland have engaged with this fully, so that there is a BSL accessible version so that deaf women can answer these questions to help the police understand how high or low the risk is in a particular situation. As you can imagine, without all of this work, interpreters not being booked, police officers arriving, deaf people not knowing the process, how confusing this could be. But having this resource available for police officers is going to be a very reassuring factor for deaf women, allowing them to take the right first steps on this pathway and process that can be very intimidating. So, and this was really based on a lot of the feedback. So with that, now we can move on to part 4. What other things are in place? What services are out there to support you in terms of aftercare? So it's the same team again. I think I'm sorry. I just keep bringing you back up again and again.
Thank you. Thanks, Lucy. Is that on? You'll be sick of me. Okay, so other things in place to support you. Okay, next slide. Oh, okay, so this is just to tell you a wee bit about the disclosure scheme for Domestic Abuse Scotland. So it was launched in 2015. And since then, we've had over 20,000 applications into the scheme. And what it is, it's our way of sharing information with a potential victim of domestic abuse about someone's past. So someone in a relationship, we have the power to tell them if they are potentially at risk because of their partner is known for domestic abuse. So there's two different kind of triggers to the scheme. There's the power to tell, and that's used by professionals like yourselves, NHS, social workers, and that's if we're potentially aware that someone has an abusive past. We maybe become aware that they're in a new relationship. We can put in an application for a disclosure, and that thereafter goes to specialist officers, specialist domestic abuse investigating officers, to carry out the research and then decide whether or not there's going to be a disclosure to that person potentially at risk. And really it's to give them that option whether, you know, if they want to remain in the relationship or not. And it's really just about giving the information to make their own choice and an informed choice. There's also the right to ask, which is if you are concerned about yourself, if you're in a relationship and you're concerned about your partner, or you're maybe concerned about a friend or a relative, a colleague, anyone really, you can put in an application to right to ask. Now you can do that by using the website. And Lucy has filmed one of the videos about the disclosure scheme. So that's in BSL, so that'll be going up when all the other information goes up, how to do the application. But you can also approach any police officer in the street, or you can go into a police office as well to put in the application. If you're the person putting in the application, if you're the person potentially at risk, if there's any disclosure to be made, that disclosure will be made to yourself. However, if you're putting in an application about a friend or a relative or a colleague, then the disclosure will be made to the person at risk, not to yourself. And the person at risk who is getting the disclosure, they'll never know who put that application in, so they'll never know that you've did that, okay? There is a wee video on our Police Scotland website about this, in particular about the right to ask. I think Jemima's going to pop it in, or Stephanie's going to pop it in the chat. And you can watch it. It does have subtitles on it, but the BSL version will be coming the next couple of weeks. I think next slide potentially. I don't believe that's my slide. I don't believe that's me. So be glad to know. Thank you.
Okay, so I think now we're at the point where you can see the image of our website, empowering people who experience, as we said, domestic sexual abuse. So in terms of all the information you need for the whole process, what's out there, how to report. So I think it's been 3 years that this has been a live website. So it was before for a different project, but now the Justice Science 2 one has been running for that amount of time. That's what the website looks like. If you want information, access to the glossary, all sorts of stuff, including this information kit, which is for professionals and interpreters, for working with interpreters. So once again, all the information that we've collated, all the research, the data collection, we've got resources for the IDAAs, for the police, for the deaf community, for the interpreters, in terms of explaining everybody's role, all the different processes, for interpreters, how to prepare before they enter a room for a domestic abuse interview, the victims or witnesses to be aware of the process, and for the police. So from deaf women's point of view, we understand, you know, we do understand we exist in a small community. So confidentiality becomes even more important in these small, close communities. The abuse is still going on out there. It leaves us in a very difficult situation. This is a real barrier to reporting these crimes, and we need to get this information out to break down those barriers so deaf women are confident that they can report these and have the appropriate services, including interpreter services, meet their needs. It's also very important for them to understand the confidentiality that interpreters are bound by, that the advisors are bound by, so that deaf women are confident and understand that regardless, they can ask for a female interpreter as well as a police officer. So they have the right to ask for interpreters. If they've been abused, they can ask, a male can ask for a male as well. That works on the other side of the equation. So on both sides, just to make sure that the deaf people, the interpreters, fully understand their rights to ask for different service providers. Also in situ, where interpreters are required, and there is a general understanding that the interpreter that was booked at the very first appointment, if a good rapport is established with the victim, that the interpreter remains consistent throughout that process, more than anything, to stop these victims having to repeat their stories again and again and again, which is detrimental, we know, to mental health. So a reduction of that really allows us for continuation of interpreting services, for people to understand all the different roles in this triadic relationship, so everybody knows what to expect, to really allow for better communication from all the different points of the service to the deaf women themselves. And we also have handouts and other resources, leaflets available. So we've produced resources in a number of different formats. We saw earlier an example of the BSL glossary that we have. I think it's 33 different videos. We still need to add to this glossary because there are new terms and new understandings evolving day by day, but we really are very appreciative to Tamsin and to make sure, working with me, to make sure that we've got a diversity of women on these videos so that we can represent the cultural diversity that we see in the deaf community, hopefully so that more women can feel that they identify with this information here. So Claire and Tasman did a great job of explaining some of this jargon. This terminology is very difficult to understand for a layperson. And in asking police services, there was an understanding that this is a clear area of breakdown of communication. So we've asked interpreters, police, deaf women, and experts in the area to get together, and we had exhaustive conversations. And it's very challenging. I found it a really interesting and almost an enjoyable process of getting to the bottom of understanding what the sign equivalents of these concepts are to help deaf women and interpreters deal with this information. So the aim of all this BSL information is dissemination via the IDAAs, domestic abuse services, for them to understand how better to support deaf women. So they can be shown this website, have all these resources available to them. They know how to then, and definitely know how to contact support services. So the glossary exists online. You can actually ask for advice and support, meet other deaf people who have gone through a similar experience. And also what's important to note is that in terms of this signs for the police, we've got some short expressions. Hi, how are you? Can we contact someone? So in the situation where police officers don't have an available interpreter, they're confronted with a deaf woman, there isn't an interpreter, they don't know how to sign, we're giving them perhaps basic signs via these videos, so at least they know how to address a deaf woman rather than cutting them off at the very beginning of the process in terms of communication. So this resource is freely available. Any police officer can look at it at any time, learn some of these very basic signs. And all these little phrases and expressions are really there so that the police can deal with a victim until deaf links. And here's Alana from Dundee. She can come up and talk more to this until they can access services such as deaf links. I didn't realize that was an actual live video. Okay. And here we are. Over to you, Alana.
Thanks. So DeafLinks have a project called Affinity, and that was a name chosen by the deaf women. Sorry, look at Richard. It was a project name that was picked by deaf women in Tayside, and it is representing deaf empowered females in Tayside. That was what they wanted to call it. So it's the first project really in Scotland that is providing advocacy support, specialist advocacy support, informing and empowering workshops, which are delivered by Lucy in general. And it is also working out there to try and raise awareness with the service providers that are there in the mainstream to try and ensure that they're more aware of deaf cultural needs, all the things that Jemina and Lucy have said, trying to inform them how to work with deaf women appropriately, be aware of deaf culture, be aware of booking interpreters, how to do that, all the basic kind of stuff. We've had to do a lot of work with the women, We were very fortunate in persuading the funders that we need to take this step by step. It's not going to be a quick fix. It's not going to be a fast process. They're now aware that the knowledge and empowerment of deaf women is way behind the hearing world. Lucy will tell you that in the workshops that she's delivered for us, she's had to go over consent 6 times to understand, for deaf women to understand what consent actually means in different situations, because it took that long, and it's still something that will be repeated again, and all the other kind of concepts that they've never had access to. And bit by bit, there are people coming forward and then needing to use the services that we have, which is providing advocacy support to go along with them if they need to report to police, to be there as the in-between with the other services that they may need within the mainstream, whether it's housing, social work, benefits, all these other sort of bits and pieces that would go together if a person had to get out of their home and go into shelter or go into refuge. We also made sure that our project was wide. We haven't cornered it down to domestic abuse only, because prior to getting the funding and knowing that the service was needed, we were very aware that there's an awful lot of historic abuse within deaf women in the deaf community, and it's something they've internalised and almost normalised, because it's happened from when they were very young in schools and all sorts of scenarios. So we have made sure that the project is open to all types of gender-based violence, whether it's happening in domestic situations or whether it's happened in the past, and that we would help support them in all manner of the needs that they have specific to them. And we're very delighted that we have got 2 of our staff that are just at the very end of their IDAA course now. So we will have 2 BSL fluent IDAAs in Scotland. Luciana is also just starting her one tomorrow. So we will, by probably the summertime, have 3 BSL fluent IDAA advisor or advocacy workers in Scotland, which is fantastic. We know we've got a lot of work to do. We would like to hope that we will continue to be supported with funding, because this is a vital service and it's only the start in Scotland. We cover Angus, Dundee, Perth and Kinross. We also have folk who come over the bridge from Fife, and we would never say no to anyone who came to our service, even if they came from Glasgow or Edinburgh, and our funders are very, very flexible on that. And our workshops will always be open to anyone in Scotland, that any deaf woman that wants to come. We would never turn anybody away. But we do hope that we can manage to establish a model that would then be able to be rolled out in other areas. And we work in partnership with the Women's Aids in Dundee, Perthshire and Angus. And it's trying to ensure that the mainstream services become more open and accessible, and try to make sure that their resources in their services for children and the women who've experienced domestic abuse are more accessible and appropriate and inclusive. So we've got work to do there as well, but we hope that we can move that forward and improve that. We're also working very much with RASAC, which is the Women's Rape and Abuse Centre in Scotland, something like that. I'm sure most of you'll know, you'll have heard of RASAC. We never call them anything else, and never really know what the acronym exactly stands for. But we work in partnership with them very much as well. And they have specialist counselling and support. And again, they're very keen and open to working with us to make sure that their services are more accessible and appropriate and deaf friendly, which is great. We really have had a lot of support there, and we work with the police a lot locally. The community liaison officers are in and out our place. Stephanie, we are in touch with Sarah as well. When if we've had any issues, I can lift the phone to Sarah and say, what about this? This is not obviously something that officers locally are aware of. Can you have a word? And it's fantastic having that networking. It's really made a huge, huge difference. So we're looking forward to having an event on the 21st of March in Tayside Deaf Hub, which we hope you would like to come along to. It's in BSL week. And Police Scotland will be there, and we would hope that they'll be able to tell you a little bit more about the domestic abuse questions at that point and the launch of that with the BSL version. So you'll be most welcome. It's between 11 and 12:30 on the 21st of March in Tayside Deaf Hub in Dundee. If you go on to our Facebook page, there's links there for the event, Bright to book in, because there'll be some refreshments and food as well available. So we would delighted to see any of you to be able to come along to that as well. But I think that's everything from me. And if anyone has any questions, if they put them in the chat, or if you want to see me, if you're here in the room later on, I'd be more than happy to answer anything, or any of the team that are with me today. So thank you.
Okay. So now you can see that Deaf Links, there's a really useful service there. That's great information about support that's available for deaf women. So I'd like to really congratulate them on getting their new staff members involved, getting the message out there, and making sure that if anybody in Police Scotland is unsure about what to do, they can contact them and vice versa. So we've got the resources at the Justice Signs website. We've got more advocates coming on board, and we really, really appreciate the opportunities that I've had to go and lead workshops up there in Dundee. And it's so interesting to see the lack of understanding about concepts, as you've mentioned, like consent. So we've explained, and through role plays and through explanations of what's going on in terms of deaf education, why we're at this position where deaf women are so behind in terms of information and empowerment. And it's initiatives like this at Deaf Links that make a huge difference to deaf women's lives. They understand how to report, to find solutions, to find ways to tell their stories. And it's one of a number of services available in concordance with Police Scotland that I think is fantastic. I'd like, on that note, to hand over to Natalie, I believe is here, who's going to be here to tell us about another aspect of services that are available.
Hello. Can everyone hear me all right? Yeah, I'm not good with microphone. Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I mean, that was amazing hearing all the speaks. It feels like very positive progress being made. So yeah, certainly things like the glossary and those professional resources available as well are going to be really useful, and definitely things I will take back with me. But just to introduce myself, so my name's Natalie and I am the Lifeline Service Manager for Scotland. So Lifeline is a specialist pet fostering service, and we support people who are experiencing domestic abuse. So I'm here sort of representing that, and also representing one of our partner organisations, which is the Dogs Trust Freedom as well. So they offer pretty much a mirror image service of ours, but for the dog side of things. If I could get the next slide. I think I should send a couple. Perfect, thank you. So just to give a really brief introduction to the service. Cats Protection Lifeline really aims to ultimately keep people and pets together. We know the really strong emotional bond, and I know probably anyone who has pets in the room knows that really strong connection that people have with their pets. But particularly people who are experiencing abuse and trauma as well, that bond can strengthen, and especially when they're sort of maybe being withheld a lot of love and comfort by the perpetrator and feeling quite isolated, that bond can really be something that will keep people going. So ultimately, we want to keep people and their pets together where possible. We also want to protect cats from harm as well. So we do sadly know that domestic abuse perpetrators will start to integrate cats into abuse and pets as well. And something we see very frequently is them being used as sort of a tool for coercive control in particular. So we want to obviously make sure we're protecting animals' welfare as well. And ultimately, we want to enable people to be able to escape abuse and live a life free from abuse in the future. So Lifeline has been running, as I mentioned, in partnership with Dogs Trust Freedom since 2004. So we were originally part of Freedom, and they sort of started to recognise they were getting some referrals in from people who had cats as well, and partnered with Cats Protection to provide the care for them. So in 2017, they recognised there was enough of a need to launch a cat service independently, which is what Cats Protection did. And that's been running in London and the southeast of England since 2017. And last year, we were really fortunate to get some funding, and we were able to really significantly expand across England. And this year, we're very excited to be launching into Scotland and Wales. So I have moved up to head up the Scotland service, which was a bit selfish because I've always wanted to live here. So, as I mentioned, we are really strong partners, and we are also founding members of something called the Links Pet Fostering Group. So that's essentially a coalition of specialist domestic abuse pet fostering services. So among us and Freedom, there's two others that operate in England. And basically what it means is that we all operate in the exact same way. So we risk assess the same, we do all the same safety measures, we treat confidentiality in the same way. So we have a really nice sort of peace of mind if we are ever referring to each other, that actually we have exactly the same sort of operating models. The Links Group, sort of the wider organisation, also does a huge amount of work with veterinary practices. So they do a lot of raising awareness of the link between domestic abuse and animal abuse, as we often see sort of one predate the other. And also a lot of work with vets to help recognise non-accidental injury in animals that are brought into practice. But also a lot of support for those vet professionals on how to navigate that situation. A lot of them, it's not something that's involved in vet training. And obviously, if you're faced with an animal where you suspect a non-accidental injury has occurred, how do you broach that subject with somebody who's in the room with you? Can I get the next slide, please? Would be great, thank you. Perfect. So I know I don't have very long, so I'm just going to talk really briefly through some of our safety procedures and roughly how the service works, just so that if you are ever needing to refer to anybody or just raise awareness of the service, then you can talk with some confidence around sort of how well we've thought it out. So Dogs Trust did a survey back in 2019. They surveyed a lot of professionals that were working with domestic abuse survivors. So some of that was within police, healthcare, housing, social care as well. And they found that 97% of those professionals reported that pets were often used as a means of controlling somebody who was experiencing domestic abuse. So a lot of what we see is that pets really become a huge barrier for people being able to leave and access temporary accommodation, because a lot of refuges aren't able to accept animals, and people don't want to leave them behind. They don't want to leave them at risk with the perpetrator, but also we know that the perpetrator will use that animal to try and get that survivor to return. So obviously it's something we really want to avoid as well. So our services are strictly confidential. We are aware that a lot of the people we are working with are at the point where they've decided to flee and they're making plans to do that. We sort of know from research and from experience that that is the point where survivors are at their highest risk of coming to quite serious harm or of homicide as well. So it's something we're very conscious of throughout our sort of working practices. So we are used to adapting to very short windows of time for collections. We will always try and work around the survivors' plans. If they are going to refuge that day, we will try and meet them on the way and things like that. We do use completely unmarked vehicles in our collection. We also don't wear uniforms, so sadly I don't have a nice purple jumper on. So yeah, people will often expect us to rock up in sort of bright yellow Dogs Trust vans and things, but they'll all strip back, so we just look like sort of white van people. We also place the pets in completely different locations to where they came from, again, just to reduce that risk. So we have very honest conversations with the survivor about where they fled from and also any connections that the perpetrator has and where those are located. So we will try and minimize that risk as much as possible. With cats, it's a little bit easier because they are staying indoor only throughout the placement. But for dogs, obviously, if they're getting walked outside and things, particularly if you have quite a distinctive dog, we want to make sure they're not getting recognised by anybody. So there are absolutely no contact between our foster carers and the owners. So it's a completely confidential service. So the foster carers who we place the cats with don't have any idea who owns those cats, and vice versa. The owners don't know ever who's looking after their pets exactly. The team in Lifeline and Freedom really act as that go-between. So any updates that get sent from our foster carers get sort of anonymized and passed on to our owners, and vice versa. If the owners are ever asking questions or giving any information, we'll make sure it's anonymous and then pass it over as well. So there is a big ask of our foster carers to never post on social media about pets on the scheme. So that includes all our staff as well. So none of us will ever post a photo of a Lifeline cat or a Freedom dog. And again, that's just to minimize the risks. We know how far social media can reach. And like you say, particularly when we've spoken today about how small the deaf community can be, we find that in quite a lot of circumstances that people are in quite small communities and things get around far too often. So we reduce that as much as we can. Microchips are a really big one for us. So we know obviously they store a lot of personal data. They store contact information and address of the owner, and it's really common for perpetrators to purposely put those in their details. Yeah, thank you. I'll be quick. And so we will completely lock that down. And so the database administrators are really great at working with us and letting us know if anybody's trying to access that information, so we can support the client and their key worker in risk assessing. Finally, all data is kept completely separate from the wider organisation. Obviously, Cats Protection and Dogs Trust are huge. So any of our owner details, our foster carer details, everything is kept locked down just to the service. And finally, our team are very experienced and trained in supporting survivors of domestic abuse. It is a specialist service, so we very much will focus a lot of our time on developing our staff members to be extremely non-judgmental, empathetic, and understand the quite unique challenges a lot of our clients face. And final slide is just a thank you. I think, and it also has some of our contact details if you do need me at all. Thank you very much.
Okay, wow. I just never knew anything about that. I mean, what if I'd known that, I would have got you to rescue mine back in the day. Okay. We are at the end of our formal presentation. I think there's Richard. Hello. There we go. So now we've got some time and opportunity for people to ask questions. I'll run the questions from the room. Jemina will deal with any questions we get through Zoom. So let's first of all address the room. Does anybody have any questions? It looks like we've got one over here. Well, regardless of whether you're going to sign or speak, can you get up so that either the interpreter can accompany you or the other interpreter can see you?
Right, okay. So I speak and you speak, right. Hi, good afternoon, good evening. My name's Rosie from the Violence Against Deaf Women Project in Dundee. So my question is, how important do you think it is for interpreters to be domestic abuse trained when working with deaf women? To everybody. Say, yeah. Yeah, I might shoot the mic. Yeah.
Sorry, must stand here. Oh gosh. That was actually one of the big things that came up in the workshop was that interpreters weren't trained in domestic abuse, and again a wee bit like when people maybe don't understand the sort of complexities around domestic abuse and what domestic abuse actually is. So within the workshops we kind of provided that information to interpreters about domestic abuse, but what we also did was we made sure that they understood where the police were coming from, and that when you're interpreting for someone in relation to domestic abuse or anything really, but specifically in domestic abuse, to interpret every single word that they say, you know, to us, make sure that you're not kind of missing anything out, make sure that nothing, you're not thinking something might not be important and not telling us, because for us to be able to carry out an investigation, and because of the uniqueness and the complexities of domestic abuse, we do that sort of holistic approach, and we need to know all the wee different bits and pieces. So if someone isn't trained in domestic abuse, they're not going to know that, and they might discard information that could be the missing link for us within an investigation. And also things like you know, kind of trauma as well, and vicarious trauma, and taking breaks and rest and looking after themselves as well. It's really exhausting to interpret when someone's taught anyway, probably when I'm talking, but specifically when someone is, you know, telling you about horrible experiences, traumatic experiences, and some really, really kind of personal, kind of dark details. So knowing how to look after themselves as well, and also knowing that they can take breaks as well, and that it doesn't all have to just be done in a winner.
I think so. Of the research, of the stats, of anything but of my work for the past 2.5 years, that's the barriers that I see. Is the interpreters, is the quality of, you know, the domestic abuse training or the trauma from, you know, approach training. I do often find that sometimes when I've been, or a deaf woman's been reporting, the difficulty was, so first of all, I'm so blessed that this DACA question's coming out in BSL. I cannot wait. I'm actually really excited. So because as a worker, as an advocacy worker, when I've been reporting with deaf clients, I've often felt that the DACA questions weren't set up to necessarily, let's say we had a woman that's been raped, to get over that impact and to gather that evidence. The terminology wasn't there to gather the evidence. You weren't getting the impact of it. Sometimes interpreters were only booked for an hour or two, or the quality of them, or there was different ones at each time. You know, reporting might have taken 2 or 3 times to report a rape or to go over that process. And to have 3 different interpreters at that stage, it just was causing barriers and barriers where, and I also felt that it must have been difficult for the police to gather that evidence of that deaf woman's journey or the impact it had on her, to be able to even submit that to the Crown, to get a, you know, to get a positive outcome for her. So the DACA questions are really blessed. So thank you to everyone on the team that's done that. It's going to help me as a worker. It's going to help the deaf clients, and it's really going to promote their rights, and definitely come forward. I could see them that they'll be more inclined to be able to tell their story. I'll be able to support them on that journey, and I can see that they're going to come forward more and more. So I just want to thank Lucy and everyone for all the great work that we're doing. It's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. There you go. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Yeah, you're happy with it. You're happy with the DAC. That's good to know. I'm just wondering if there's any questions online. There is actually a question here from somebody online. It's a deaf woman who started to relate her experiences. So I'm obviously going to summarize what she said here. From her experience, she's saying she seems to have had a very negative journey, I'm afraid. She's contacted the police and had a very bad experience. She's found that either the police nor the social workers really understood her experiences or how she felt, and that there were issues to do with children in this particular situation. It seems a very complicated situation. So obviously we can't you know, divulge her personal experiences, but she thinks, and she's saying that she's an example of somebody who's been through this, had this experience, traumatic experiences, and she hopes that this project, where all these partners are working together, the development of resources, the training of interpreters, training of the police, and support that's available to deaf women in the community now, she's just saying that she hopes that the future is better and brighter in this respect, and that deaf women have a more positive experience dealing with the services. And online, as we've said, you can contact Deaf Links. Alana's saying that if you want to, anybody is welcome. Any deaf women around Scotland can contact them. That's an open invitation. You can contact Police Scotland. Again, all the information, the links, everything will be available here. So support is available. Do we have any more questions in the room? You can make a comment as well. Anything you've learned, anything you'd like to say? I wanted to know, is there any training for, someone like myself? I work just at the Deaf Club. So I want, as somebody who generally works in the deaf community, how can we create safe spaces, work together? Is there any training available for people generally? Lucy's saying, yes, there's plenty of training available. You can contact Sarah. Sarah, you would probably be, did you want to answer that in any way in terms of what's available for generic workers with a community in terms of domestic abuse awareness? Just off the top of my head, if I was you, you can contact your local police, ask what their training is to do with safe spaces. If they don't seem to know, then you can get them to contact Sarah, because she's in the right structural place in Police Scotland in order to deliver that service to your deaf club. If you want training on safe spaces, specifically about how to keep deaf women safe, or any gendered issues, there are trainings and workshops available. And the Justice Science 2 project, obviously the website has got a lot of information. I'm happy to come and do training on the back of that. It is you, Lucy. It's going to be, do you mind saying, it's going to be you that's doing the training, Lucy. There's no doubt about it. If anybody does need generic training on understanding safe spaces, domestic abuse, consent, all those things, Lucy is the go-to person. Thank you. I hope that answers your question. All right. Do we have any more questions or comments? Looks like everybody's satisfied with the information they've received. How about anybody online? Nope. There doesn't seem to be. All right. Well, that's us then. Well, it seems we've done a really good job. So now the only thing that remains is me to sincerely thank all of the people joining us on Zoom, police officers there and in the room. I want to thank all the deaf organizations and the domestic abuse organizations for coming here. I hope that all of us being together in this space will improve the situation for deaf women. If there's anything that you're unsure about, you want more information, you can contact any of the main partners in this project. There are always ways that we can point you to resources. We are here to give you information. Thank you all for coming to this event and supporting us and our project. Really, the last thing to draw things to a close today is to say a huge thank you to Lucy for her work over the last 3 years on this project. It's disappointing that the funding is at an end. It's regrettable that we can't have her carry on working. We are looking for some funding to carry on some pieces of work. But one thing really to be proud of, I think, with Lucy is that she is the face, based on her own experiences of being a deaf woman survivor. And it's very authentic, and you can see the huge change that that's happening in Scotland and the rest of the UK. And she's a very important role model for the advocacy of deaf women. And I'd also like to thank, on that note, Police Scotland, Deaf Links, Sign Health, the British Deaf Association, the Association of Sign Language Interpreters, all the stakeholder and partner organizations. We can't do this work without effective teamwork and collaboration. I never even introduced myself for the university I work for. Anyway, I work for Heriot-Watt University. We should give them a shout out as I've been auspicing the research project. So research and academic research is all fine and well, but if you're not informing or impacting on people's lives, making a difference to the real world, to services, to training, then really what's the point? There has to be that connection between theory and practice so that we get all stakeholders benefiting from these very fruitful partnerships. I'd like to finally thank Deaf Action for hosting our event today, for Richard McQueen for organising all the technical aspects to do with today and keeping us online, and to the interpreters Andy and Emmy who've worked today, both into BSL and English. I've got a Scottish accent as well today, and I've got a male accent. That's weird. Okay, so look, thank you very much for coming. Please keep in touch with us and the project. And thank you, Kat, as well. Natalie's got you guys, slid you in at the last minute, and Sarah, of course. Thanks to, well, everybody. Cheers then.